Lucille Ball was in the middle of telling a joke on The Tonight Show when a 7-year-old boy sitting between her and Johnny Carson said 5 words that stopped everything. What happened next left Johnny Carson completely speechless and 300 studio audience members in tears. It was November 8, 1978 at NBC Studios in Burbank, California. The cameras were rolling live. Millions were watching at home. Lucy was wearing her signature royal blue sequined gown and pearls, looking every bit the legend she was. Johnny was in his perfectly tailored gray suit, coffee mug in hand, ready for another night of entertainment. But what started as a standard celebrity interview turned into the most emotionally raw moment in television history. And nobody, not the producers, not Johnny, not even Lucy herself, saw it coming. What that little boy asked her that night would crack open 40 years of carefully hidden pain and change all 3 of their lives forever. If you want to know what happens when fame meets truth, keep watching and tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching this from. Welcome to Celebrity Unseen, where we reveal the untold stories behind Hollywood's biggest moments. November 1978 was a strange time for Lucille Ball. She was 67 years old and considered untouchable Hollywood royalty. I Love Lucy had made her the most famous woman in America. Her face was recognized in every home. Her comedy was studied in every acting class. But what the world didn't know was that behind the laughter, Lucy was drowning in loneliness. Her second marriage to Gary Morton had quietly fallen apart earlier that year. Her children, Lucy and Ceci Jr., were adults now, living their own lives, and Lucy felt like she'd missed their childhoods entirely. She'd spent decades being Lucy Ricardo for millions of Americans, but she wondered if she'd ever really been Lucille Ball for anyone, including herself. The Tonight Show appearance was supposed to be simple. Promote her new CBS special. Tell a few stories, make Johnny laugh, go home. Lucy had done it 100 times before. She knew how to perform. She knew how to protect herself behind the character everyone expected. But what Lucy didn't know was that in the green room backstage, a producer named Patricia Newcomb was making a decision that would change everything. Patricia had received a letter 3 weeks earlier from a woman named Claire Thompson, a social worker from the Los Angeles County foster care system. The letter told the story of a 7-year-old boy named Michael Harris who'd been in the system since he was 3. Michael had been moved between 8 different foster homes in 4 years. He'd been returned by families who said he was too quiet, too withdrawn, too difficult. The trauma of abandonment had made him nearly silent. He barely spoke at school. He had no friends. Child psychologists were worried he might never recover. But there was one thing that made Michael come alive. Every evening at 6 o'clock, he would sit in front of whatever television was available and watch I Love Lucy reruns. Something about Lucy's physical comedy, her fearlessness, her ability to get knocked down and get back up again spoke to this little boy in ways that no therapist ever could. Claire Thompson had written in her letter that Michael had told her, "Lucy gets hurt, but she always gets back up. Maybe I can, too." The social worker had a simple request. Could Michael meet Lucille Ball just for a moment, just to shake her hand? It seemed like an impossible dream, but Patricia Newcomb had a soft heart and connections at NBC. She'd pulled strings to get Michael and his current foster mother, Ellen Rodriguez, tickets to that night's taping. They were sitting in the 3rd row, center section. Michael was wearing a beige cardigan sweater over a light blue collared shirt that Ellen had bought him special for tonight. His blonde hair was neatly combed. His small hands were folded in his lap. He looked like any other well-behaved child, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone much older, someone who'd seen too much, Lost too much. What Michael didn't know was that Patricia Newcomb had gone one step further. She'd arranged for Michael to be brought on stage during Lucy's interview. It was supposed to be a sweet moment. A cute kid meets his hero. 30 seconds of television magic. Everyone smiles, everyone claps, show goes on. But what nobody understood was that bringing this particular child in front of this particular woman at this particular moment in her life was about to create something far more powerful than anyone had planned. What happened when Michael sat down between Lucy and Johnny would expose the loneliest secret in Hollywood. The interview started exactly the way everyone expected. Johnny opened with a joke about Lucy's new hair color. The audience laughed. Lucy fired back with a perfectly timed zinger about Johnny's divorce. More laughter. They fell into the comfortable rhythm of two professionals who'd known each other for decades. Lucy told a story about filming her new special. She did the voices. She acted out the physical comedy. The audience was eating it up. Johnny was leaning back in his chair, grinning, sipping from his coffee mug with the NBC Peacock logo. Everything was going according to script. Then, about 12 minutes into the interview, Johnny glanced at his notes, and his expression shifted slightly. He looked toward the wings of the stage where Patricia Newcomb was standing, and she gave him a small nod. Johnny set down his coffee mug and turned to Lucy with a smile that seemed just a bit more genuine than his usual host smile. "Lucy," he said, "we have a little surprise for you tonight." Lucy's professional mask stayed in place, but her eyes showed a flicker of concern. Surprises on live television were dangerous. "Oh no," she said with practiced lightness. "Should I be worried? I don't think so," Johnny said. "We have someone here who's a very big fan of yours. And when I say big fan, I mean someone whose life you've changed without even knowing it." The audience stirred with interest. Lucy adjusted her pearls, a nervous habit she'd had for years. From the wings, Patricia Newcomb gently guided Michael Harris onto the stage. The little boy walked slowly, carefully, his eyes huge as he took in the lights and cameras. Ellen Rodriguez followed a few steps, behind her hand on his shoulder for support. The audience immediately responded with warm applause. Michael was small for 7, and in his cardigan and collared shirt, he looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Innocent, vulnerable, sweet. Johnny stood and shook Michael's hand, then gestured for him to sit on the couch between himself and Lucy. Lucy's professional warmth kicked in immediately. She smiled at Michael, but it was the smile she'd perfected over 40 years, the one that looked genuine, but cost her nothing emotionally. "Well, hello there, sweetheart," Lucy said, her voice taking on that particular gentle tone adults use with children. "What's your name?" Michael looked at her and for a moment he couldn't speak. He was sitting next to Lucy Ricardo, the woman who'd been his only friend for 4 years, the woman who made him believe he could survive. "Michael," he finally whispered. His voice was so quiet the microphone barely picked it up. Johnny jumped in with his practiced ease. "Michael, I understand you're a pretty big I Love Lucy fan. Is that right?" Michael nodded, still staring at Lucy. "I watch it every day," he said, his voice slightly stronger now. "It's my favorite show in the whole world." The audience made a collective ah sound. This was going exactly as planned. Sweet kid, sweet moment. Lucy would say something kind, maybe ruffle his hair, and they'd send him back to his seat with a signed photo and a great memory. But then Michael did something unexpected. Instead of looking starstruck and tongue-tied the way most kids did around celebrities, he looked directly into Lucy's eyes with an intensity that didn't belong to a 7-year-old. It was the look of someone who'd learned to read people because his survival had depended on it. And what he saw in Lucy's eyes behind the professional warmth and the practice smile was something he recognized. He saw loneliness. He saw pain. He saw someone hiding because he'd been hiding, too. "Miss Ball," Michael said, and his voice had a quality to it now that made everyone in the studio unconsciously lean forward. "Can I ask you something?" Lucy's smile stayed in place, but something flickered in her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything you want." And then Michael Harris asked the question that would break Lucille Ball wide open in front of 40 million people. "Miss Ball," Michael said, his 7-year-old voice somehow carrying perfect clarity through the studio. "When you fall down on the show and everybody laughs, are you scared inside? Because sometimes I think you look scared even though you're smiling." The studio went completely quiet. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air pressure had suddenly changed. Lucy's professional smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but the cameras caught it. Johnny Carson, a man who'd interviewed presidents and movie stars and had a prepared response for everything, suddenly had no response at all. He just stared at this little boy who'd somehow asked the one question nobody had ever dared to ask. Lucy started, then stopped. She looked at Michael, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her usual deflection impossible. This child knew, somehow he knew. That's a very smart question, Michael," Lucy said, and her voice was different now. Less performed, less protected. "Why do you ask that?" Michael didn't break eye contact. "Because I get scared a lot. People put me in different houses and I have to smile and be good so they'll keep me. But I'm scared inside all the time. And when I watch you on TV sometimes I think maybe you understand. Maybe you get scared too, even though you're so famous and everybody loves you." Something in Lucille Ball's chest cracked open. This 7-year-old boy had just articulated something she'd never admitted to anyone, including herself. The audience was completely still. You could hear someone's breath catch in the third row. Johnny Carson set down his coffee mug with shaking hands. "Michael," Lucy said, and her voice was trembling now. How did you know that?" "Because I watch your face," Michael said with the simple honesty of childhood. "Not the funny parts, your face. And sometimes when you're about to do something scary on the show, right before you smile, you look the way I feel inside. Like you're brave, but you're scared. Like you're going to do it anyway, even though it's hard." Tears filled Lucy's eyes. Her perfectly applied mascara began to run. Her hands covered in rings and jewels were shaking. "Sweetheart," she said, and her voice broke completely. "I've been doing this for 40 years, falling down, making people laugh, being brave when I was terrified. And in 40 years, nobody, not one single person, ever asked me if I was scared. The dam broke." Lucille Ball began to cry, really cry, in front of 300 studio audience members and 40 million television viewers. Not delicate celebrity tears, deep raw sobs that came from decades of hidden pain. Johnny Carson looked like he'd been punched in the chest. His usual quick wit, his practiced host persona. All of it evaporated. He reached for Lucy's hand, then pulled back, unsure what to do. Michael, this tiny 7-year-old who'd been through more trauma than most adults, did what came naturally to him. He moved closer to Lucy on the couch and took her jeweled hand in his small one. "It's okay to be scared, Miss Ball," he said softly. "My counselor says brave people are scared, too. They just do the hard things anyway. You taught me that. You taught me I can fall down and get back up. Lucy squeezed his hand and looked at him through her tears. Michael, I need to tell you something. Can I tell you something true? Michael nodded. The entire studio seemed to hold its breath. I am scared, Lucy said, her voice raw and honest in a way it had never been on camera. I'm scared all the time. I'm scared that I spent my whole life making strangers laugh while my own children grew up without me. I'm scared that I chose wrong. I'm scared that all of this, she gestured at the studio, the cameras, the audience, all of this fame and success doesn't mean anything because I'm going home alone to an empty house every single night. I'm scared that I played a character so well that I forgot how to be a real person. The confession hung in the air like something sacred. Johnny Carson's eyes filled with tears. A woman in the front row was openly sobbing. A man in the balcony had his hand over his mouth. Then Johnny did something he'd never done in 16 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He stood up, walked around the desk, and sat down on the other side of Michael, completing a circle of 3 people holding hands. Lucy, Johnny said, and his voice was thick with emotion. I need to say something, too. For the next 8 minutes, Johnny Carson talked about his own loneliness, his failed marriages, the emptiness of going home after making millions laugh every night. He talked about the persona he wore like armor, and how exhausting it was to never let people see him as just Johnny, just a man who hurt and hoped and wondered if any of it mattered. The studio audience was no longer an audience. They were witnesses to something profound. Several people were crying openly. Others sat in stunned silence, and in the center of it all sat a 7-year-old boy holding the hands of 2 of the most famous people in America, teaching them both what it meant to be human. Michael, Lucy said, wiping her eyes and smearing her mascara even more. You just did something incredible. You asked me the most important question anyone has ever asked me, and I'm going to answer it honestly. Yes, I'm scared, but sitting here with you right now being real for the first time in decades, I'm less scared than I've been in years. What happened in the next segment would prove that this wasn't just a moment. It was a transformation. The producers cut to commercial break, but nobody in that studio moved. Lucy kept holding Michael's hand. Johnny sat beside them, his perfectly groomed silver hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. Patricia Newcomb stood in the wings with tears streaming down her face, realizing she'd helped create something far bigger than a sweet TV moment. During the commercial break, something remarkable happened. Ellen Rodriguez, Michael's foster mother, came onto the stage. She was a 52-year-old woman from East Los Angeles who worked 2 jobs to support the foster children she took in. She wasn't supposed to be on camera, but she walked right up to Lucille Ball and said something that would matter more than any award Lucy had ever won. Miss Ball, Ellen said, her voice shaking. Michael has been with me for 6 months. In 6 months, I've barely heard him speak 20 full sentences. He has nightmares every night. He won't let anyone touch him. He won't make eye contact. But every evening at 6 o'clock, he watches your show. And for 30 minutes, he smiles. For 30 minutes, he's not scared anymore. You've been more of a mother to him than anyone since his real mother disappeared. I just thought you should know that. Lucy stood up from the couch, her expensive gown sparkling under the lights, and pulled Ellen into a tight hug. Then she turned to Michael and knelt down so she could look him in the eyes at his level. Her knees cracked audibly, and she laughed through her tears. See, Michael, us brave people, we fall down all the time, but we get back up. She took off her pearl necklace, the one she'd worn on The Tonight Show dozens of times, and placed it around Michael's neck. It hung down to his waist, comically large on his small frame. "These are costume pearls, sweetheart," Lucy said. "They're not real. They're part of the costume I wear when I'm being Lucille Ball the celebrity. But you know what is real, what we shared tonight, the truth we told each other. That's real. And I want you to keep these pearls to remember that being real is worth more than any costume." Michael looked down at the pearls, then back up at Lucy. "Miss Ball, can I give you something, too?" He reached into his cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a drawing he'd made that afternoon, a child's crayon drawing of a woman with bright red hair falling down with a huge smile on her face. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "You are brave." Lucy took the drawing with shaking hands and pressed it to her chest. She completely broke down again, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Johnny Carson stood up and did something unprecedented. He looked directly into camera one and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stay with this. We're not going back to our regular programming. What you're watching is more important than entertainment. This is real. This is what matters." When they came back from commercial, the show was completely different. There was no more script, no more jokes. Just 3 people, a legend, a host, and a child talking about loneliness, courage, fear, and what it means to be seen. The phone lines at NBC began lighting up, not with complaints, with stories. People calling to share their own moments of loneliness, their own struggles with wearing masks, their own gratitude for this moment of raw truth. Johnny opened up the conversation to the studio audience. A veteran stood up and talked about coming home from Vietnam and watching I Love Lucy to remember what peace felt like. A young mother talked about watching Lucy while dealing with postpartum depression and feeling less alone. An elderly man talked about watching Lucy with his wife of 50 years who'd recently passed away and how the show kept her memory alive. The Tonight Show that was supposed to end at midnight went until 12:47 a.m. NBC let it run. And when it finally ended, Lucy made a promise to Michael that she would keep for the rest of her life. "You're not going back into the system, sweetheart. I'm going to make sure of that. You're going to be okay. We're both going to be okay." 6 months later, something impossible happened that nobody saw coming. By May of 1979, Lucille Ball had become a different person. The woman who'd spent 40 years hiding behind characters and costumes had learned how to be herself. And it started with keeping her promise to Michael Harris. Lucy used her considerable influence and resources to help Ellen Rodriguez formally adopt Michael. She hired lawyers, made calls, pulled every string she had. On March 15, 1979, the adoption was finalized. Lucy was there at the courthouse. No makeup, no fancy clothes, just Lucille Ball standing next to a 7-year-old boy and his new mother, crying tears of joy. But she didn't stop there. Every Sunday, without fail, Michael and Ellen came to Lucy's house for dinner. Lucy's own children, Lucy and Ceci Jr., started joining these dinners. Something about Michael's presence, his honesty, his willingness to be vulnerable, opened up conversations that the Arnault family had never been able to have. Lucy Arnaz later said in an interview, "That little boy gave us our mother back. We'd had Lucy Ricardo our whole lives, but after that night on Carson's show, we finally got Lucille Ball." Lucy's career changed, too. She turned down 3 major TV offers and instead started doing something completely different. She began visiting children in foster care, in hospitals, in difficult situations. Not as Lucy Ricardo, not as a celebrity doing charity work for publicity, just as Lucille, a woman who understood what it felt like to be scared and alone. Johnny Carson's transformation was just as profound. The Tonight Show became known for moments of real vulnerability. Johnny interviewed celebrities differently. He asked deeper questions. He shared his own struggles more openly. He later said that night with Lucy and Michael was the most important show he ever did. "We spend our whole lives entertaining people," Johnny said in his memoir years later. "But that night, a 7-year-old taught us that connection matters more than entertainment. Truth matters more than performance." Michael Harris thrived with Ellen Rodriguez. The boy who'd barely spoken, became a happy, talkative child. He started making friends at school. His nightmares stopped. He learned to trust again. And every year on November 8th, the anniversary of that Tonight Show appearance, Lucy would take Michael and Ellen to dinner and they'd watch the recording together. Michael, even as he got older, never tired of watching it. "It's the night I stopped being alone," he'd say. The episode itself became legendary. It was replayed countless times. It was studied in psychology classes as an example of authentic human connection. It was preserved in the Library of Congress as culturally significant television. But the real miracle wasn't what happened on TV. It was what happened after. Lucy lived another decade until 1989. And those were her happiest years. She spent them with family, with Michael, with real relationships instead of celebrity ones. When she died, Michael Harris, then 18 years old, spoke at her funeral. "Lucy taught me that it's okay to fall down," he said. "But more importantly, she taught me that it's okay to ask for help getting back up. She asked me for help that night, even though she didn't realize it. And helping her helped me. That's what love does." The drawing Michael gave Lucy that night, she had it framed and it hung in her bedroom at her house until the day she died. She looked at it every morning. A child's crayon drawing that said, "You are brave." The most valuable piece of art she ever owned. What happened that night created ripples that are still being felt today, 45 years later. Today, in the lobby of NBC Studios in Burbank, there's a small bronze plaque that most visitors walk right past. It reads, "November 8, 1978, the night television became real in memory of the courage to be vulnerable." Every performer who works at NBC sees that plaque, and many of them know the story. The story of how a 7-year-old boy asked Lucille Ball if she was scared and how that question changed everything. Michael Harris grew up to become a child psychologist specializing in foster care trauma. He's now 53 years old, married with 3 children of his own. He runs a nonprofit called the Real Lucy Foundation, which helps foster children connect with mentors who teach them emotional courage. The foundation has helped over 15,000 children. Every child who goes through the program receives a copy of Michael's crayon drawing and Lucy's pearls. Well, a replica of them. The original pearls are in Michael's office in a glass case with a photo of that night beside them. "People ask me all the time what Lucy gave me that night," Michael said in a recent interview. "They think it was fame or connection to celebrity. But what she gave me was permission to be real. She showed me that even the strongest people are scared. Even legends need help. Even brave people fall down. And that changed my life." The Tonight Show episode has been watched over 50 million times on various platforms. It's used in therapy training. It's shown in communications classes. It's referenced in books about authentic leadership because what happened that night wasn't just touching, it was transformative. Johnny Carson's final episode of The Tonight Show in 1992 included a clip from that night. He told the audience, I interviewed 22,000 guests over 30 years, but one interview changed me forever. A 7-year-old taught me what really matters. Not the laughs, not the ratings, the connection, the truth, the courage to be real. The story reminds us all of something we forget too often. We never know who's watching. We never know who needs our truth. We never know when being vulnerable might save someone's life or our own. Lucille Ball spent 40 years being bulletproof, being untouchable, being Lucy Ricardo. But the night she let a 7-year-old see her fear, that's the night she became truly legendary, not for what she performed, for who she was willing to be. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that vulnerability is strength and truth is sacred, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had a moment when being real changed everything? We want to hear your story because here at Celebrity Unseen, we believe the untold stories are the ones that matter most. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's okay to be scared. Just ask for help getting back.